Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Earth in Hand podcast. I am Scott Howard with Earth in Hand Natural Building, and today my guest is Roger Green. Thanks for being here, Roger.
Pleasure, Scott.
Roger, you've been a teacher and proponent of feng shui and Taoism and the cosmic order, sacred geometry and mathematics for over 20 years.
Like 40 years, not 20 years.
Teaching so many people around the world, and I'm just a really huge admirer of your work. So thanks for being here and sharing your knowledge with us.
Right. Well, thank you. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. I grew up, I'm a Kiwi, which means I'm a New Zealander. Kiwi is our national bird, so New Zealanders don't call themselves New Zealanders. They always say, I'm a Kiwi. So I grew up in New Zealand, and when I was around 20, I traveled to, I actually hitchhiked through America, actually.
Oh, good for you.
This is way back in the late 70s. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was fun. And yeah, in those days, you couldn't fly all the way to America. In fact, from Auckland, you had to go to Hawaii. And I actually spent kind of like 3 or 4 days in Hawaii sleeping on the beaches. And yeah, in those days, it was this was the 70s. We were real wild creatures. And I hitchhiked through America, got to London with 7 pounds in my pocket, right? And so basically, I got involved with the natural healing movement in London at the East West Centre. And it was also called the Community Health Foundation, because I actually got very, by this stage, having gone through the 70s, which meant that you experimented with everything under the sun, I was actually quite sick. And I was living with these people that got involved with what is known as macrobiotics. And I had never heard of it, but as a teenager, I was quite interested in metaphysics. I did go to university and I studied, mathematics and chemistry and physics and everything. But then I got interested in traveling. But as a teenager, I was sort of, for instance, I had, I mean, who didn't have a couple of copies of the I Ching and reading Alan Watts and so forth, but I'd never come across a practical application of yin and yang. It was all very philosophical and metaphysics,
Sure.
etc. And macrobiotics was a sort of grounded approach with it, right? Particularly orientated around diet and sort of like there was a lot of Japanese teachers and Japanese folklore medicine. And anyway, I adapted a few of those principles and my health radically changed. For instance, when I got to London, I couldn't ride a bicycle to work or anything. And I was actually a little I thought, oh, who wants to live in this horrible place, right? And I thought, oh, I'll probably just stay here for a couple of months and head home. But I actually ended up living in London for 5 years, starting like a health protocol. I noticed these incredible fundamental changes in my life. My energy got so much better. I basically kind of had a chronic fatigue, right?
Sure.
And that improved. I could ride my bike across London. And what I noticed emotionally and psychologically, my attitude just totally changed. I was thinking, wow, London's an amazing, exciting place. So I became fascinated with the connection between mind, body, and spirit, which in Taoism is clearly defined through, traditional Chinese medicine. We have the organ groups, which are associated with colors and cooking and food and emotions and psychological attributes. So I
Right, right,
ended up studying at the East West Center and got involved with the early development of the natural foods movement. Remember, this is like the late 70s. There was only like one health food store in London, and if you got there late, all the organic vegetables were gone by 11 o'clock in the morning, you know. Uh, and so I was making tofu and I was making sourdough bread and what was referred to as seitan, which is this sort of meat substitute. And, studied shiatsu, and I studied some martial arts, which was, Aikido, which I found just one of the most beautifulest martial arts. And anyway, cutting a long story short, I went back to New Zealand and started to teach that. But then I ended up in Australia, Sydney, Australia, and I opened one of Australia's first uh, kind of holistic health centers. I actually had a cooking school. I was doing counseling with natural foods and healing. And that evolved into the Academy Healing Nutrition. And in the meantime, I studied formally acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, which
okay,
is kind of a lot different. Macrobiotics was kind of like some very simplified version of TCM, uh, you know. And then in traditional Chinese medicine, we have a theme called the eight rays of Taoism. And so at the core is kind of like the Tao, which, I'm sure your listeners and know that the Tao is often referred to as the way of nature, the cycles of nature, that you can see winter changing into summer, and that we have polarity in our universe, positive and negative, masculine and feminine, centripetal and centrifugal, right? Uh, so, cut a long story short, that's the core fundamental uh, uh, concepts. And then it's applied to these eight practical realms: food as medicine, herbs, martial arts, meditation. And what we mean by meditation, by the way, is psychological thinking as well. Yes, it was a form, various forms of meditation in the sense of calming the mind, stilling the mind, developing the inner life of contemplation, etc. But also, the Taoists were very good at psychological intervention, hence all the beautiful classical works, and hence people like Alan Watts picking up on that and diving into that. The other modalities are feng shui and massage, right? So I just named these eight rays of sort of Taoist modalities, right? So I had a school that, yes, we were doing food as medicine, but then I integrated the herbs into that, right? So the Academy Healing Nutrition, back in those days, a long time, this is going back 40 years ago now. This is like, we're talking the 80s now, yeah? Um, so it was kind of like the first school that had all eight rays. That never happened before. You see, like, you had martial arts schools, but they were just doing martial arts. You had acupuncture schools and herbal schools, but they weren't kind of doing the diet, right? And the other aspects. So um, now we couldn't qualify people on acupuncture, but I had already a diploma of shiatsu course happening. So we had the massage, right? And then we had 10 weekends of acupuncture training, because by that I was very frustrated with my acupuncture school that I went to, because it was very institutionalized and you couldn't use needles and for a year, and it's like a long-winded, yeah, a third of it was, which was interesting, a third of it was actually um, kind of like training like a nurse. You had to do all the anatomy and
sure.
pharmacology and all that, which was good. It was a good discipline, but it was kind of like a little frustrating. So we integrated acupuncture. Now, feng shui didn't exist. Remember, we're talking like the 80s. Nobody knew about it, but because it was part of the eight rays, and a lot of those mandalas that you come across in the feng shui writings, we actually have in acupuncture, right? Because in acupuncture, we have the meridian system, and that's based on the cycles of heaven and earth, and they're referred to as the 10 heavenly stems and the 12 earthly branches. Uh, so you've got heaven and earth, or yang and yin, combining into the third, right, which is the human being, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom. If you look at the reality around you, there's these three aspects. We have the sky chi, the cosmic chi, we have the rhythm of the earth, and then we have us, right? And that's created out of heaven and earth.
Outstanding. Yeah.
So I wrote a feng shui curriculum, and I didn't have a teacher, and because nobody was talking feng shui. There was one book uh, out of, I think, Singapore, but I was able to kind of, as a Taoist, you only have yin and yang and the five elements. Now, the five elements are sort of wood, fire, earth, metal, water, which is following the stages of expansion and contraction, right? And you can see these realities of like winter, spring, summer, and then the late summer and autumn. So you can see expansion and contraction, and it's just sort of broken down into these five phases of energy, right? So we only have yin and yang, the Tao. We have what's known as the three treasures, which I just named: heaven, earth, and humanity. Uh, and you only have that to explain everything, how healing, the cosmos, metaphysics, I Ching, you name it, right? So I was able to write a feng shui curriculum, and then I started to teach feng shui, and I actually started to do some unique things. I started to, well, how do you do feng shui for the southern hemisphere, uh, as opposed to it came from China, and I had to really go deeply into what are these, like the Bagua, what does it represent, which is just the sun's pattern. And the yang was in the south in China. At noon, the sun is high, so that's the yang phase, right? Whereas for us in the southern hemisphere, that's north. Our sun goes in the opposite way. Still rises in the east, but goes high in the north. Obviously, sun sets in the west, and then low in the south. So that's the yin and the
Okay.
yang and the, yeah.
You had to
So
adapt the systems for the southern hemisphere.
exactly, yeah.
Hmm.
And I don't think I would have done that if I had like a feng shui teacher back in, because they're quite like, no, no, you don't change anything, with this and all of this. And then I was also very keen on dowsing and earth science. And because of my feng shui, uh, curriculum, we got involved with design and what was known as kind of like healthy home, right? And
Sure.
don't forget
Love it.
we'd already had homes that were very toxic, a lot of electromagnetic fields, the chemicals, the off-gassing, all of these things. So because of the feng shui, I got involved with that whole movement. Now, then, because of my involvement in feng shui, I started to think, well, what is our Western feng shui? And that, of course, is sacred geometry, because sacred geometry is what is used in all the classical architecture, right? And all the proportions, which, by the way, the Chinese had in their, if you analyze their palaces and the temples, they're also using golden mean, square roots, octaves, etc. Right? It's
Yes.
kind of like a musical pattern, as you know. So I
Yes.
got into sacred geometry. Now, by this stage, people had heard about my feng shui, and I got asked to come to teach in Austria and Germany and England and London and New York, and
Wow.
actually ended up teaching over 70 countries. And uh,
Cool.
I started schools overseas through because people, I called it the new kid on the block. We had these gifts from the East, like Zen and martial arts and macrobiotics and Chinese medicine. And they all sort of, over the last 120 years, they've come to us. The early Jesuits in China started to write about acupuncture and the I Ching. In fact, the I Ching came, and that was quite significant in our development of certain mathematics. Anyway,
Really?
so
Wow.
yes, it was. Leibniz, he got hold of I Ching from a Jesuit priest, and he was fascinated with it. And he was one of the leaders of, the mathematics development. This was in the 17th century from memory. And anyway, so I got involved with sacred geometry, and that led me to meeting Dan Winter. I was actually teaching in uh, Colorado, Aspen, Colorado, and a student said, "Hey, let's go to this event tonight. It's this guy Dan Winter, and he's talking about sacred geometry." And that's where I met Dan, and then I ended up sponsoring Dan to Australia for a good 3-4 years, and I started to put on international conferences that were feng shui, eco design, and sacred geometry, sort of like bringing all of these disciplines together into a holistic approach, right? And then the
Outstanding.
East and West theme. And
Yeah.
I did several of those conferences, Zurich and in California, uh, in London, all over the shows, so to speak. And that's, of course, where we started to develop the theme of bioarchitecture. And so anyway, I ended up sponsoring Dan for many, many years. We did tours we started to look at the mystique of South France and all of those mysteries. We went to South America and I organized these Mexican tours. And then I said to Dan, let's we did that for several years. And I said, look, we've done a lot with education, but let's get more into the technologies. So we started to Dan started to develop the imploder, which is a water treatment device.
Yes.
Uh,
Have one. Great.
and, there's been sort of several developments. He's been doing certain things. I've been doing certain things with other teams, but we often, there's often quite a focus with what we're both trying to achieve. Like we have a cold fusion Urangara project. So anything, we got involved with obviously science and spirituality, and then putting that into the technologies, because I think academically we got very, very stuck with the reductionist theory, and and there's just so many really good technologies to investigate. So through breakthrough technologies, I was one of the original investors in the Andrea Rossi Ecat system 12 years ago. Unfortunately, nothing's got onto the marketplace. But you had to start somewhere. And back in those days, it was only Andrea Rossi and a few other people. Now I go to the cold fusion conferences, and now there's a couple of dozen labs all over the world. And for the first time, a little bit of American government support, which was peanuts. They threw like $10 million at some university to do this, because as you know, it's quite a if you use cold fusion academically, you virtually lose your job. It became famous through the Fleischmann and Pons experiments, I think,
Right.
back in, yeah, and it sort of made a big splash. It was
Some
on
reason
Time
it wasn't
magazine.
reproducible, but a lot of people believe they actually did it.
Yeah, well, they kind of did and didn't. It was a little bit premature, but I say they had bleeps on the screen. They had a reaction that was not chemical. Cold fusion is just very hard to contain, right? It just sort of wants to run away. And it was. I mean, it was terrible. Academia, they can be vicious, right? You'd think something like that, they'd say, "Oh, okay, you didn't quite get it, but let's get into it, guys." No,
Yeah.
that didn't happen. And those guys
Right in.
they lost their jobs.
Yes.
And if you mentioned, cold fusion, you'd be blacklisted, and just crazy. I mean, it's interesting at these cold fusion conferences, because you sort of meet these older dudes who are kind of in their Navy, American, technologies. And now that they're retired, they can get into cold fusion. But back in those days, they said they weren't allowed to. It's
I see, I see. Yeah, I've been interested in this stuff for, decades and talk openly about, zero point energy with a lot of my friends. And I have one particular friend who is, is an astrophysicist, like a very heavy duty physicist. And I told him my thoughts and what I've been reading. And he sort of just laughed it off and was like, here, read this. And he gave me a Feynman book to read, and it was really cool. But, here we are so many years later, and I'm fully convinced that the Ecat, among other devices, they do work. It's just a
well,
very
no,
simple process.
the ECAT never came to market because it didn't work 100%.
Okay,
It needed a lot more development, and it wasn't stable, and it
sure.
wasn't, but there's like a dozen other labs and a lot of focus on cold fusion now. There's one cold fusion conference, international conference a year. So, and those group of scientists are taking it seriously. There's a group in Japan who are taking it very seriously. And then I met Bob Greenyer. And Bob Greenyer is the sort of the go-to guy. If you want anything validated, Bob is the guy that a lot of people go to, especially emerging technologies, right? To have somebody to critique it and go deeply into it. And Bob, has done that for many years, and he runs the Martin Fleshman Foundation, which is a kind of like a group of people, mainly led by Bob. Right, and Fleshman and Pons, remember, were
Yes.
the original. I mean, cold fusion has been around for 100 years or even more. Basically,
Okay.
for those who are listening, cold fusion is what nature does, and let's just call it transmutation, right? So, and that's basically alchemy. That's what alchemy was based on. So, one of the events I've been putting on for 15 years or so is called the Alchemy of Prague. Because through my activities, the Academy Healing Nutrition, uh, it was Sydney, New York, London, and Prague, right? Then with COVID, it went totally online. But leading up to COVID, I was teaching, you know, for the last 20 years, two or three or four, sometimes four times in Prague, right?
I see.
So I actually have been there over 100 times, and it's just amazing. And I actually ended up sponsoring Vincent Bridges, who I met through Dan Winter, and that was the first Alchemy of Prague about, I don't know, 15 years ago now. And Vincent Bridges was a remarkable esoteric historian from North Carolina. And I got him over to Prague, and then he ended up living in Prague and writing about the missing years of Shakespeare because he was hanging out with John Dee and Edward Kelly, in the 17th century, and all of these amazing storylines that Dan and I were exploring. And Vincent actually wrote some books about that, but unfortunately he passed away about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years ago now.
Okay.
So that's the theme of the Alchemy of Prague Ancient
Wow.
and future. So, for instance, Paul Harris, the inventor of the Ferrify, he's actually an old-fashioned alchemist as well. So in Prague, we actually teach, I love doing practical, the Academy Healing Nutrition is actually half of that is practical cooking, right? Because you can talk about food, and it just goes in one ear and out the other. It's the greatest habit that people have. And to make those changes, you've got to show them, eat this. This is how you put this together. This is how
How
you
to
use
cook
this
it.
ingredient.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has to be. And Taoism is, what I loved about Tao. Yes, it's this amazing metaphysical, philosophical, graceful philosophy, but it's incredibly grounded, right? It's very, you develop these sort of daily habits through it, and particularly you master your own health. You heal yourself with the tools from Taoism, and the herbs and the food, the exercise, etc. So it's very, very grounded, right? So the Academy Healing Nutrition is that way. Plus, a lot of the things I've done with Dan, and then with Paul Harris, we actually we show people how you can set up a simple distillation alchemical lab, right, for a couple of $100. And then you can make your spagyrics, you can make your plant medicines, you can make your tinctures. And I have a background obviously in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic. And then the third one for me is still the Western Hermetic tradition, which you find all of those amazing concepts through studying Western alchemy. So Paul Harris has, really put together a nice little curriculum that we, over 3-4 days in Prague, we go through, the spirit, the soul, the salt, the earth, the way the ancient alchemists would approach. Very, very similar to chi prana, the terminology that you might use in Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine. It's sort of the same essence, but it's a different language, a different terminology, and a little slightly different approach to things, but it's a
Right.
holistic approach,
And are you guys breaking down the plant medicines in chemistry terms as well?
Only a little bit,
Okay.
because with the time that we've got, we just go into the alchemical symbolic terms, right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah. And then the practicality of making these spagyrics like rosemary, etc. And
I'm
once you've
sure the
got your
audience
own,
is people's heads are spinning because it's everything holistic and you're doing so many fascinating things. I mean, I just want to recap for a minute, just that, beyond the health and the food as medicine and the plant medicines, you're also into breakthrough technologies. That's your other website, right? So you have the
yeah,
Feng Shui seminars, you got the breakthrough technologies, you're doing these different events.
with the Alchemy of Prague, after Prague, it's a 10-day event. We go to Tesny Kromov. Now, if anybody goes to the Czech Republic in the future, you'll always want to go to Chesny Kromov, which is down in South Bohemia, closer to the Austrian border. And that's where Western sort of alchemy kind of got revisited from about 700 AD onwards. And of course, the Renaissance and Chesny Kromov is a beautiful medieval town. But, Rudolph II in the 17th century also supported the alchemists from all over the world, came to Prague and Chesny Kromov. Right? And then we go to Brno, which is more eastern. We have a few visits to castles and glassblowing factories and so forth. The Czech Republic is quite a magical place. Anyway, we get to Brno, and that's where the advanced energy systems or future alchemy, again, the key line is transmutation, right? Natural transmutation, how nature does, which is kind of like the cold fusion approach, right?
Yes.
This is not hot fusion, which costs billions of dollars. Cold fusion, you can work out in your garage with a little bit of equipment, so to speak, right? And Bob and Paul, right? And Bob and Paul was an amazing inventor. And we've got a few, the Therify.tech has been on the market for several years now. And Paul brilliantly put kind of yin and yang together, spinning a plasma vortex clockwise, anti-clockwise, using the golden mean ratio. It comes down into the 0 point, and then it emanates the longitudinal pump waves, which is the way the universe works. It's not a sine wave, it's a longitudinal scalar wave, a bit like a sound pump wave. And every cell in your body communicating with nutrients and the membrane, it's a longitudinal pump wave. So the Therify, Paul brilliantly put all of that together. He's very hands-on, Paul. He's been involved with many, many developments of inventions. And we've got a project that we take that to the next level called the Teslatron, based on Guy Oberlinski. Guy Oberlinski was an American genius physicist, and I used to visit him on a regular basis for many, many years, plus a colleague of mine, Alan Rode, was with Guy. And Guy passed away about 5 years ago, and Guy was obsessed with building the Tesla healing machine that Nikola Tesla talked about in the 1920s. And Guy built this rather big machine. He kind of had it working, then it wasn't working. People came from all over the world to be in that machine. It's a high voltage, ionic wind. And Paul and I sort of pretty much rebuilding that. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about cold fusion. Uh, there's also the waste to energy project that Paul has. Now, what your viewers need to know about is that there's an amazing um, emerging technology called the thunderstorm, developed by Malcolm Bendall, who's actually an Aussie guy.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I've seen this on your videos.
yeah, and it was recently at the Cosmic Summit in North Carolina, in Greensboro, right?
This is
Which we
like
all went to about just only about 2 months ago. And Malcolm took several years to develop that, but it's out. It's a lot of people have tested it, validated. Of course, Bob Greenyer was the key person
right.
that Malcolm got to, uh, because Bob's independent. He's an independent researcher, right? And it's really got remarkable transmutation happening. It can take in exhaust and pollutants, and again through implosion, which Dan Winter has really, really put implosion on the map over the last 40 years through his work with the golden mean ratio, the way nature works, sacred geometry, and he was the guy that was really talking a lot about the effects of implosion rather than explosion. And so Malcolm has put together something that you can put into any kind of fossil fuel engine, gas, petrol, diesel, you name it, coal, you name it, and basically negate all of the pollutants out of that, and at the same time get more oxygen and actually get, and it's been measured like 20% more efficiency in like a genset or like a generator, right? So,
Outstanding.
so yes, we'll be talking about the thunderstorm. Uh, Malcolm won't be there, but he's supporting it by a guy called Gordon Collins, who is the Alchemist Kitchen scientist. Alchemist scientist.
Okay.
The Alchemist Kitchen is a place here in New York that I've been involved with, helping with the tonics and the elixirs and the superfoods and all of that. So Jordan is going to be there with Bob. So that's the Bruno, the future alchemy, right? And it's going to be hands-on. Bob is going to, he's got a lab there. So it's not just the theory side. It's, we're going to show people how you can do like little experiments around cold fusion and implosion and all of these things. So it's actually quite a unique event.
Fascinating.
And I'm more than happy to be promoting from what I've seen of the thunderstorm, it's quite and I've got to know Malcolm over the last couple of months really, really well. So,
I mean,
Dan Winter's putting on a conference in September as well, towards the end of September in South France, which I'm going to be attending to. A lot of the people involved with the bioarchitecture, Arturio, and
yeah, our hero and Lydia will be there, and
yeah, and Dan will be talking about many aspects and a lot of guest speakers. So that's in South France.
as
And the
far as
Academy Healing Nutrition starts again. We get a group of
yeah,
students, about 60, 70, for 1 year. Food as medicine is I take very, very seriously. It's not just like a quick conversation. If you want to heal yourself of, we've had people, with cancer and MS, or just
mhm.
digestive problems or wanting to know how to live to 180. We have a theme in Taoism. Taoism has been obsessed with longevity. You know how all the biohackers into longevity, etc. Well, what they don't, and you go to those conferences which I attend, you don't get any of the Taoism or Ayurvedic. It's all biochemistry, which is fine, and that's finally become exciting. Western nutrition was boring as anything. Yes, I know what vitamin C looks like, the molecule, and you could read about it. It wasn't very experiential until the biohacking community people like Ben Greenfield and Dave Ashbury and all of these people. And they've really started to create what I call a renaissance of Western nutrition, because a lot of that work was done 100 years ago, right? Uh, I'm more interested in the energetics, what's warming, cooling, what's going to strengthen the kidney, the jing, what's going to strengthen, your blood and chi, basically, and build your blood and chi and your life force and prana, etc. That the biohacking communities, there's now billions of dollars spent on the chemistry around the aging process. So it's actually become very, very exciting only in the last 7 years. The Academy of Healing Nutrition is actually up to speed with all of that. We go from, ancient understanding of the body, the chi, the five elements, the how food is healing, the practical cooking, and then we have a module there. It's 10 modules, like spaced over, completely online now, with a lot of really good support, from my team, mentoring and so forth. But we have a module now with the biohacking, where, I got involved with telomeres 10 years ago. Now it's like people know about it. If you said, what are the telomeres, which are the little tentacles at the end of the chromosomes, and they wear and tear, and that was the first definition of aging and dying, was the discovery of the telomeres, because up to that it was just like, oh, the heart is, you're not breathing anymore and the heart's not working, right? That was, okay, you're dead, right? Now they've actually got a biochemistry version of aging, which was the telomeres. And then there was a lot of work that went into, well, how can you trigger the telomerase, which repairs the telomeres, and all of these. And we had a product on the market for several years called the Telestep, way ahead of the game.
Oh, that was your product.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with
Doug,
that.
a colleague of mine, Rex Hodge, who was actually a rocket scientist. True story. He's a rocket scientist,
Yeah.
and he lost his job, right? And he's pretty much run the original buy. This is going back 12 years ago. He lost his job. He had some free time for a couple of years. We sort of developed the primarily through I was supporting him morally and everything. And then we actually put the Telestep on the market. We're not doing it anymore because there's all these other. I only do original things. I'm only, if I was a rock and roll band, I wouldn't want to play music from. It'd have to be original material, and I'm only interested in original inventions. And now that other people know about that, there's good companies on the marketplace who do all that, because you've got to spend a lot of time on marketing with those sort of things. And I never did that. I only did it mainly for our Academy Healing Nutrition students, and that module of using all the new biohacking and the supplements that are coming out, and understanding the aging process. So yes, that true sense of health and health span, it's an East and West approach, not just a Western approach, not just the Eastern. We can combine those two, and you've got something incredibly dynamic there. So yes, we're up to speed with that, with Academy Healing, with the breakthrough technologies. I always feel that we're on the cutting edge, and a couple of steps ahead of the game. So that's exciting for me. That's why I'm personally involved with it all, because it does take a lot of.
It's so exciting. I can't tell you. It's like, yeah, I've just been studying along these lines for so many years, and I feel so fortunate to have met you and your team. I have so many questions,
Yeah, let's do them.
but I wanted to make a comment, just an aside, really quick, that I've already gone and experienced Therify many times. The Therify device, I feel it really works. It does something. You feel an uplift of energy. I've left Therify sessions and I felt just giddy. I'm
Yeah.
I'm driving around in my car waving at strangers, and just from
Yes. I'll tell you a
Therify.
story, Scott. When we first released it many moons ago, we Paul and I and Dan, we took it to a beautiful spa in Belgium, right? And that's when we first released it. And that's technically, I'd been involved. The Therify started in my first a breakthrough technology conference in Calgary in 2008, right?
Mm.
Where Dan, Paul, and I dug up all the material on the Priori device from the 1970s, right?
Right,
So we
Antoine
dug it, we
Fuller.
presented at the conference, and then Paul went on to physically develop it. And then we released it, about 7, 8 years ago in Belgium in this beautiful spa. And there was a good gathering of about 50, 60 people for all of our contacts. I didn't sleep for 2 days, mate. It was so much charge. And Paul and I, we were drinking whiskey at 4 in the morning. Okay, we're gonna pump up. People are gonna be back. We just didn't sleep. I didn't sleep for
Yeah,
two or
turn
three
that thing
days.
down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Amazing, amazing. Well, yeah, and then I'm trying to explain to my parents recently about the thunderstorm generator, and this is a chemical, or you could call it alchemical transmutation of elements, right? So the additional components that they add onto a gasoline generator, for example, taking the emissions, which have these long chain hydrocarbon molecules, right? They're pretty pretty huge molecules relatively, and then somehow those disappear, and you end up with like oxygen and hydrogen, and
Yep,
that's it, and
yep.
then they're gone. So do
And
we
it's
know?
been validated many, many, many times now.
But do we know why that? We don't even know why that's happening yet, right? We just know it works.
Well, in layman's terms, basically it's taking all those particles through the 0 point, right? Because it's a major, those domes, there's major implosion happening. And when you take things through uh, the 0 point and then out the other end, it's just classic yin and yang. And by the way, what I love about Bob Greenyer and Malcolm, right, is these top scientists, top inventors, they talk yin and yang. That's why I got into bed, so to
Right.
speak, with Bob, because he actually understands, he uses the term yin yang, implosion, imploding, and then exploding. If you look at the torus, it's all to do with the torus. You've got the contraction and then the expansion. And so they're called plasmoids, right? So um, the thunderstorm is generating, a phenomenal amount of these plasmoids, which have this ability to transmute. They're taking things through the 0 point and then out the other end, and they transmute themselves. And that's what transmutation is based on, is this whole thing. And that's what Malcolm brilliantly put together, right, in the thunderstorm generator. So yes.
Would you say that there are longitudinal or scalar waves involved in that technology as well?
We would have to ask Bob and Malcolm to clarify that. I would say absolutely, but we would have to put it into context. I can't speak officially about the thunderstorm. We'd really have to go back to, you
Sure.
know, uh, you might even want to interview Gordon Collins. Gordon is a student of Malcolm, and Gordon has been Jordan, sorry. Jordan's been putting on a lot of technical explanations of the thunderstorm, right? And he goes through all of the components of it. It was kind of like open source. Malcolm has open sourced it, so people, at the Cosmic Summit a couple of months ago, there was a truck there that a guy had sort of created it from Malcolm's designs and put it into his truck. So aspects of it are open source. People are making them for their own vehicles, but then there's another aspect that there's a patent and a manufacturing process that Malcolm's developing to get it onto the marketplace. But there's aspects of it that are open source there.
Wow.
It's called strikefoundation.earth, and a lot of those designs, the original open source designs, are up on that website, strikefoundation.earth.
Okay. And then, you've seen so many different technologies over the years. Clearly, the thunderstorm generator you feel is very important right now because you're highlighting it. But of all the things you've seen, like what do you feel is like the most important thing for people to be paying attention to right now?
Definitely the thunderstorm, because the fact of the matter is, I've been involved with a lot of inventions and supported a lot of inventions. You, and you got to have a lot of patience around R&D, research and development. A lot of patience. Fortunately, I've got a lot of patience. A lot of it hasn't come to onto the marketplace. The Therify came onto the marketplace. The imploder has come onto the marketplace, but there's at least a dozen other projects that I've been involved in that they haven't got to the marketplace. Whereas the thunderstorm, it's getting to the market. It's gone through its kind of due diligence phase, where various people have tested it, various locations. Like they had it in London on a factory, they've had it in India, Malaysia, etc., Australia. So I'm excited about that because it's tangible, it exists, there's some solid evidence, and it's been independently validated, which is, as you know, vitally important. So yes, that's
And
the leading technology, and what it does, it's very exciting what it can do. And when it doesn't take much to think, well, that's just the starting point. If it does that, there's all these other avenues that you can start to explore with it. Yeah.
yeah, well, and I'm thinking about the most effect for where we're at now. Humanity has all these machines already built. So if somebody has an add-on, you can add extra components to an existing engine, and it has a really
Yeah,
great
if you can
effect. Yeah,
neutralize, or at the end of the day, we dig up a lot of things off the planet, right? And but the fossil fuel has been an issue through the pollutants. The global warming thing. Well, that's a controversial area. A lot of people. There's various arguments around that. But at the end of the day, they're pollutants. If you can deal with the pollutants, as in like no carbon, no carbon, it reduces big time carbon monoxide, right? Big time. Uh, Carbon dioxide, there's still some testing and validation around how much carbon dioxide it does, but it does a lot, right? So if you've got something that can actually purify uh, that resource, then that's we still haven't got there, as you know, with solar and wind. It's just which is kind of like you kind of think in this day and age we should be way beyond that. That's why I'm so interested in cold fusion, because it takes us to the next energy quantum leap, which is what we really, really need. And as you know, culturally, community, globally, we need cheaper energy, for third world countries, for our own economies to evolve and have a theme of abundance, right?
yeah,
And it's been really challenging getting that with you know, things like even hydrogen, which I've been involved with. There's a lot of some of those projects have dropped away by some of the big players. They're just discovering it's just so hard to get the, ammonia battery, the hydrogen thing, it was sort of began to be very promising, but the logistics around it, the economics around it. So if you can be using it's sort of like I don't want to sound like a big proponent of fossil fuels, but if at least it's not going to stop, and the fossil fuels that we are using, if you can transmute all the pollutants out of that, and even make the engines even more efficient, so technically you use less of it, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
That's important. That's really, really important, and it could be the first stage of developing more of these implosive technologies. That's the important thing here, is that it's possibly one of the first implosive technologies to get onto the marketplace and to do its job and to educate people around not explosion, but implosion. So it's kind of a radical departure from our previous technologies. So it's a step in
Outstanding.
the right direction, big time.
Outstanding. Yeah, it really is. And transmutation is like the theme of this era that we're in right now. We have to transmute all these things. So I've studied a lot. I talked to Jay Dubinsky. I did an interview with him on this podcast, and I also talked to another really interesting physicist, this guy Jürgen Kleinwachter from Germany. So as you know, Jay is also a friend of Dan Winter. Jay Dubinsky heads up the Energyme Green Group, and they work on
Yeah. The
some
Red Sun project, and yeah.
new method of basically storing hydrogen. So they're creating hydrogen from solar, direct solar, and then they're storing the hydrogen with nickel so that it's
Yes, it's
kind
a
of in
nickel
like
battery.
liquid
Yeah.
form so they can actually contain it and hold it. And
Yeah.
there are some really great things coming down the pipeline, but the R&D, like you said, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
We're still working on it, but they're doing some great stuff over there in the Philippines
It's
right
got
now.
a lot of potential. Yeah.
Yeah.
He just has to get a prototype on to build a prototype so you can actually witness it. And that's what's, people need is a prototype built that you can, so it's tangible, you can measure it, you can have independent validation of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure they have that working already. I think they're just taking steps carefully to, set up everything so they have their business moving forward. But yeah, and then there's, one of my favorites actually from quite a long time ago. I found out about Tamara Solar Eco Village and the inventions of Jürgen Kleinwachter. I mean, it's very simple compared to the implosion technology. This is just concentrated solar. They're capturing heat, they're using uh, direct solar to run a very slow RPM Stirling engine that can power a whole village. And
Yeah.
very accessible. It's not expensive, and so I think we should all be looking at that too, is like moving forward to, energy independence. Um,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then you have your, wood gasification devices that I can see in the near future, why not have a wood gasifier engine? This thing burns wood and it runs similar to any other gasoline engine. It's getting the syngas from the wood and
Yeah,
it's scrubbing the gases and then running it just like a gasoline engine. So we could apply the thunderstorm generator to that process. So anyway,
exactly. Yeah.
I see lots of hope, and we all need to focus on what's working, and this is really working. So really really excited to learn about those. And
I think we're going to be seeing some, things coming into the market over the next, 3 to 4 years that have been in the back burner for the last 20 years that are finally going to be coming through. So it is, we're sort of into, in Taoism, we have these sort of cycles of cosmic charge. I mean, a lot of traditions, try to trace the influence of the cosmic energy, and we're going into what's called a nine fire time for the next 20 years. Hence, AI, that's part of the fire, when you get into the associations and the symbolism. Uh, we have a danger of still of death by chemicals, right? Which is
definitely,
your work has been very good with that, with Earthen. It's like really shown the fundamental thing is to, not poison yourself with sugar and chemicals and harmful substances and the subtle things of electromagnetic fields and all of these things, we have to get really clued up. I sort of see it, you can go down like a pathway, earth friendly or artificial, right? And you kind of see that with the food that people are eating, sort of artificial food, right?
yeah.
Even artificial meat, I don't agree with, it just doesn't make any sense. And all of these things. So, just getting into more natural living and natural technologies, using nature, really celebrating, the essence of nature and listening to nature. And so they're the technologies like what you just described there. It's just like, they're the technologies I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more uh, over the next 3 to 4 years, as this sort of transition happens into this new phase of energy. We kind of talk about these cycles and Taoism. It takes a bit more explanation beyond our discussion today, but that's the sort of influence over the next 20 years. So, and you have to be really, really careful around nuclear in this phase of energy we're going into. You have to be really, really careful about the effects of nuclear. I'm talking about nuclear war. I think there's a place for nuclear power with some of the new technologies, the smaller scale ones, the cheaper ones. It makes a lot of sense. Hopefully, we have cold fusion on the market before that, because then you wouldn't need to have it. But there's a place for that. I'm talking about, there used to be a big movement to get rid of nuclear warheads, and that's the campaign for nuclear disarmament. That was big in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. With the younger generation, that one's disappeared, right? I think that should be coming back. There's a lot of energy around the climate change with the younger generation, which is a controversial area, as you know. It's not settled. There's a lot of dynamics there to investigate. But the nuclear warheads, we should have got rid of them by now. That's
That's
just insane. And going into
yeah,
this fire phase, it's even more dangerous.
so obvious, huh? Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get on that path soon. And, I know that if we can just focus on, those things that benefit humanity and not on
That's what we've got to do. Yeah.
this warlike,
Focus on what we can get
approaches.
involved with, what we can control. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all it is. But I had some other questions about, we talk about alchemy a lot, and I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about the ancient evolution of alchemy from like ancient Kemet, and how ancient Kemet may have been related to some of this traditional Chinese medicine teachings and what came out of China.
Well, all of these cultures, ancient culture, the Ayurvedic has a system of alchemy. The Chinese had their famous alchemists. A lot of them, like in the West, a lot of them died through wanting to create, the elixir of immortality and all of these things. As I said in my introduction, it's just a terminology difference. That there's some different symbolism, different cultural influences, etc. But at the end of the day, it's all about transmutation, right? That's the key thing that links it all up. And then with our understanding of quantum physics and all of that, we can take, which the ancient alchemists didn't have. That's the beauty of the theme of ancient and future alchemy, is that we can now bring in the scientific protocols and using microscopes and all sorts of electric microscopes and all sorts of uh, 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 technologies that we combine with the ancient alchemists. We still use those themes of ancient alchemy, but we put it into a more futuristic sense. You just can't get stuck on that, right?
Okay.
Alchemy is about transformation of the physical to the soul level as well. It's a form of a spiritual pathway. It's a form of enlightenment. It's a form of developing mental clarity, a form of understanding relationships and food and the universe and the seasons and nature. So it can't be just sort of stuck in the past. We admire what they did in the past, and there were some really, really interesting things that happened, like as you just meant, the mana, the white powdered gold out of Egypt. It's all part.
Atomic gold, yes.
Yeah, all part of it. So yeah,
I was just going
very.
to ask you about that. I had some recommendations from Dan, and I did purchase a couple of samples from some friends of ours. Are there any modern sources of monoatomic gold that you believe are authentic or
Oh,
worth?
they're all pretty good. They're cottage industries, and they're behind it are very good people. I've been involved with that community to an extent. I had a project called Bloom the Desert in Dubai where we used ormes, but it was we used it from the ocean. So you got your basic ormes that you can make yourself from sea salt, and then for your listeners, there's other forms of ormes that you make out of gold and silver and generally some of them are like powdered white gold and all these things. That the community is an intelligent, uh, ethical community. You just have to. I don't have any recommendations. I buy some, just off the internet, the Ormus gold. Just it's about $100 a bottle, but it lasts you a whole year. Because you only need a little bit. I don't take it every day, right? Um, but the thing about Ormus is that it's a good way of getting, say if you're taking it from the seawater, it's a good way of getting some macro and all the micro uh, minerals that you need. We need at least over 100 macro and micro minerals for our immune system to function. And with the modern diet and modern uh, agricultural methods, monoagriculture, we're just not getting those minerals. So you have to have a minerally rich diet, right? So using one of the takeaways for your listeners, I highly recommend that you start to research, study, and cook with sea vegetables. And we've been teaching that for 40 years, how I'm, and that's not a casual thing. If you just listen to that, then follow it up and do it, because that's the way you can get a lot of these macro and micro minerals into the system, and they're delicious. They add to a bone broth, really, really like some kombu. Put some seaweed in when you cook your beans. Wakame goes into a salad or a miso soup. These are really, really strengthening foods that our ancestors used all of the time, right? Now, that's one way of getting the minerals. And then, of course, the ormus. But the thing about ormus is that it traps this sort of photons. It traps the prana. It traps the life force. So you get this other kind of more esoteric layer coming from ormus. So, yes, I can only recommend that people explore it, research it, find a good supplier, right? Just start with the fundamentals of it first, and then uh, if you're inclined, experiment with some of the more evolved, like the white powder, etc. Some of it you have to be careful with, not to overdose, not to overuse these kind of things. You just be sensible. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it can burn your aura, so to speak.
Yeah, well, people abused it. Yeah.
So, talking about you as a holistic designer, I know that you worked with permaculture designers, and I remember you did this Bloom the Desert project, and there's a whole nother aspect of you we didn't really cover yet in the interview, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about permaculture and how it fits with your concept of holistic design and your Bloom the Desert project.
Well, anybody who I think is involved with holistic medicine, I've been teaching food as medicine for 40 years. You need to also get involved with regenerative agriculture and permaculture.
Right.
Permaculture was developed out of Australia. We had some in Australia, and America. There's some really, really amazing teachers. And it's a really, really good system to apply. And in a way, we need to get back to that small farm, to that sustainability. And regenerative agriculture and permaculture are the two schools of thought that have, really developed those practical skills, that practical knowledge, how it varies from, location to location, from different intentions. So it's malleable. You can adjust it to what your needs are. And, it's earth friendly technologies, that we need to look after this planet. So anybody involved with holistic medicine should have a form of education around and knowledge around permaculture and regenerative absolutely, just part and parcel of what you're doing if it's going to be a holistic approach. Now, we had a project, where we started to use during the COVID years. I was back in Australia a lot with working with an amazing biochemist in Australia, Leyland Minter. And if you went into like a, a nursery, like a place that you needed to buy something for your garden and you wanted an organic weed killer and organic, if you went in Australia to that store, there's about there's always about 4 or 5 products. Well, at least 3 of them Leyland developed in his career, right? And then he sold all of them off and so forth. Then we got involved. He was one of my uh, support with the Bloom the Desert, because we were using Ormus, we used biochar, we used the imploder, magnetized water. The whole theme was to transmute using just these low cost, the high desert sand. It's got a very, very high alkaline, like 13. We tested the desert sand, 13.2
Wow.
pH, yeah, to begin with, right? Uh, and then we dug these trenches and we put in the biochar, which is very easy to make and available. We put in the ormus, which I was able to make just from seawater, just taking the truck and within a day or two, you've got a lot of ormus. We used microbes, so we did have water. We had a drip feed water, and just like a little scoop of like a teaspoon a day virtually into a tank of water is enough. You see, the biochar is like a little hotel now for all that enzyme microorganism reactions that you generate through the ormus and the microbes, right? And it holds it. And so we brought that desert sand down to what was it? Something like from 13 to like 8.4 or something. Which I've bloomthedesert.com has actually got the testing before and after. So, and then you only needed to use a small, I always say, oh, then we grew cabbages in the sand. We kind of did, I'm being a little poetical. We didn't use any fertilizer, right? The whole idea was to demonstrate how you can use these other low-cost technologies and then just use a small amount of fertilizer. We wasn't saying that you can't do without the fertilizer. And then I came back a year after that and applied just a small amount of organic fertilizer. The whole idea was, like in India, a lot of Indian farmers, tens of thousands of Indian farmers commit suicide every year. Most people don't know that. And because they get into debt primarily with Western chemical countries supplying them, with all the fertilizer, big time. And they get into debt. So the whole idea was to show how you can use these regenerative practices where you can just, if you can reduce, your fertilizer cost by 50%, then that means their children can go to school and they can be fed and have shoes on their feet,
Yeah, definitely.
So, and then a lot of Americans have picked up the theme of regenerative agriculture, and it's getting really a lot of great movement happening. And farmers aren't stupid. Farmers are the best people on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. They're the most, grounded, and if they can see that a value added, that they can actually get more, and look after their land, which they kind of want to do, but they weren't able to do it historically. They got involved with all the chemicals and, just to kind of keep the economics going. But if you can present to them a plan that it's value added, you can actually get more for your buck, and you're going to look after that planet and not, have all the runoff going into the streams and the lakes and all the algae problems and all these things, they listen, and they get onto it. And it's a really, really good movement particularly in Australia, America, and to a degree, of course, in Europe. So we're kind of getting there. And permaculture was the original regenerative philosophy that came out of Australia about 50 years ago with Bill Mollison. He was the guy who put it on the map. I had the privilege to work with some of his original students, through the bioarchitecture, eco-design. I sponsored them also to some of remember that theme of the bioarchitecture, feng shui, sacred geometry, and eco-design. Well, the permaculture was very much part of that, those presentations. So yeah, it's an exciting time. We've got all of this knowledge. It's just a matter of putting it together, which, Earthen, doing those workshops, at the end of the day, you got to show people there's a lot of information around. People get sort of like buzzed out. But if you can take them through, like, okay, this is actually how, this is the practicality of it, and it becomes grounded, and
Yeah,
you pass on those skills, and they start to do it. It's the same with everything. It's food as medicine, permaculture, etc. So there's some really, really good grassroots movement happening around the world. That doesn't get any attention from mainstream media. It never will. But it's people like you doing these podcasts, people listening to it, their own local networks, their own friends who are getting into this. It's a very, very strong grassroots movement. Yeah.
I agree. I agree. That's what it's all about, and yeah, we did a workshop last year, the bioarchitecture primer. Dan Winter was one of the 12 guest speakers that I had in that event, and we had, I think, 10 or 12 students, and it was amazing. A holistic design of the home, and really leaning heavily on regenerative design, permaculture design principles. We had my first permaculture teacher, Larry Santoyo, was there. He was one of the first students of Bill Mollison.
Hmm.
So yeah, we're putting that out there. I'm still in the process of editing those videos down to put it out here publicly for free on YouTube. But yeah, it's just super exciting stuff, and I never get tired of talking about this. So
Yeah, good on you.
we have a chance to talk more. I'm excited to
What's
continue.
the name of your YouTube channel, Scott?
The YouTube channel is just Earthen Hand.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
So you can find us by searching that. And the other thing I was going to mention was just that, I see you, and especially that Blooming the Desert project that you did is just being so foundational, so fundamental, to the future of humanity, and it fits in with some of these other permaculture heroes, you might say, Sepp Holzer and Jeff Lawton, who are doing similar projects. And then one of my former students in Earthen building, this guy Neil Spackman, went on to start a company called Regenerative Resources, and they also do similar things. So the theme with those people that I mentioned is just reclaiming currently unusable lands that have been desertified, and truly, it could be attributed to humanity's negligence of the land and why it became a desert in the first place, or so
Hmm.
much desert. So we're reclaiming those deserts little by little and learning how to do that. So I think combining what you guys came up with in the Bloom the Desert project with some of the other knowledge that's laid down by these other people like Sepp Holzer,
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Well,
there.
Layla and I went on to develop, after the Bloom of the Desert, which I financed. I didn't get any sponsor to take it further, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I realized, of course, we needed an organic, fertilizer with the ormus, to combine it. I realized that you still needed like a, weed control to and insecticide. So we uh, over those COVID years, for a good 3-4 years as well, we developed a really good range of organic products. It's up on organic biotech dot solutions. And it's a really about 6 really good um, products that for a range for anybody doing organic farming. Unfortunately, we kind of, because of COVID, we lost our investor. Um, so haven't been able to put it onto the market. Because we needed to build a factory and get all that developed. But we did all the R&D and all the testing and all the formulation and really, really good products there. If anybody wants to check it out, but they're not on the market. If you go to that website, you'll see what we actually did. Like developing. The weed control was, finding an alternative glyphosate is very, very tricky in the organic movement, as you might know. But we did that. We developed something that's, doesn't work as good as glyphosate, but about 70% of those weeds you could use with our formulation. Then uh, yeah, I think it's the first complete range that was actually using Ormus in the product range as well. You know, that was properly formulated. You know, that a farmer could start to use. You know, including you know how in hydroponics they have you ever been to a hydroponic? I'm sure you have. And you look out the back, there's these big, you know, containers of chemicals that they've used, right? You know, it's a chemical. So we actually developed a one product that hydroponic farmer could use, just the one product, you know, with the ormus, with what we refer to as a sort of fermented um, soy sprouts product. So, and then the added phosphorus, you know, that we got from rocks that we had a particular type of rock. And so we put it all together in the one product. So a hydroponic farmer would just have to put that one product in and completely organic, you know. So we developed that. So that all came out of the Bloom the Desert project. Yeah.
Were you guys the company that was developing, I think it was called Sea Grow or something like that? So it was like the Ormus product that was made from seawater.
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
the before organic biotech dot solutions. I called it Sea Jing.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Leyland and I, and that we had that on the market in Australia for a bit, but then we got more excited about the whole developing a whole new range. So the Sea Jing, Jing, is the Taoist term for the essence of the life force. So in a way, it was sort of like what Ormus is. It's that essence of life force out of the seawater that you capture. And so that was the term that I used, Sea Jing. That's right.
That's brilliant. And so you were pulling this out of seawater with magnets, maybe, or something like that?
Oh no. We just use the you know, the lye process. It wasn't we weren't using magnets. They use magnets a lot for spring water
Okay.
to get the ormus out of that. No, we just had a high. There was actually a guy in Australia that we were working with. He was an old fisherman, and he would take his boat out to where the water was very, very pure in a big tank and bring it back to his garage. And he had these big vats, and basically just through using lye, you know, and letting it settle, and it forms, you know, like a very, very thick kind of milk-like ormus. It takes about a week or so to process. Yeah.
Fascinating. And then there's the other process you mentioned earlier with the industrial imploder that where you can implode the water and that changes the water as well, right? But that's a different process.
Well, that's the imploder that Fractal Water, Jason and Dan Winter and myself have been involved with it right from the beginning. That where the imploder it's recharging the water. We use that. That's been on the market for several years. So people in agriculture use that. Uh, you know, you can use it. It doesn't filter the water. So domestically, you have to filter the water and then put it through the imploder. But it's
Yeah.
used a lot in horticulture, agriculture. Yeah.
I put one on my shower head and then I also put one on my, outdoor hose bib. So I'm imploding my water as I
Exactly. Yeah.
myself and water my
Yeah.
plant.
Recharges the water, which is very vitally important.
All super fascinating.
We're actually doing it in the basement of the Edward Kelly Tower, where John Dee lived in the 17th century. And
Yeah.
John Dee is the most famous alchemist. He was the astrologer to Elizabeth I. He was the most educated man in Europe, had the biggest library. At 17, he was lecturing at university, spoke several languages. And so we're actually in the basement of where these guys did their alchemy experiments and sponsored by Rudolf II. So it only holds about 25 people, and we've pretty much maxed that out.
Right.
It's the most historical place, along with Chesney Kromov, to kind of learn alchemy. You know, people are coming from also Austria and Germany and London. You know, they can just come to that event and learn about the thunderstorm, implosion technologies, waste to energy, Teslatron. You know, and spend some quality time. You know, socializing with us all, with Bob and Paul as well. You know.
Right. Excellent. Well, yeah. Can you
We all
repeat?
we all we all drink beer. We all drink Czech beer. So
Socializing is very important. That's where the
it
movement
is
starts. Yeah, that's where
that
it all starts.
you know, if you don't have that, you need to do. That's why I put on the conferences. That's why I have these great friends. You got to develop a soul group and a soul uh, manifestation in a morphic field. You know, with Rupert Sheldrake's great work. You've got to create that uh, uh, vibrational friendship, you know, with others, and as a soul group to manifest these technologies. They just don't they're just not isolated events. So that's why it's important to come along to the conferences, to get out of your shell, to be hang out, to go. You know, if Dan's putting on this event in South Front, show up. You know, I'm putting on this event. You know, you need to show up. I go to at least 6 conferences a year. You know, you can't just do it. You know, from reading, Zooms. You know, there's a place for all of that, but it's very, very important for human beings to get together, especially with a focused endeavor of, you know, developing new energy, taking us to the next quantum leap in technologies and energy and regenerative agriculture, all of these things. Very important to show up, eat and drink together and discuss, you know.
Agreed. Well, can you repeat your main website where people can reference your events that are upcoming?
Yeah, well, all of the material for the alchemy of Prague is actually up on academyhealingnutrition.com. And if you go to the events page, click on that, it'll take you to a page where you can download a 15-page brochure. You can watch a video, an overview video of the whole event. So that's it. And of course, you can also explore the activities of academyhealingnutrition.com. That program starts again January 2025. We have one group intake each year, right? And we take them for that whole journey. It's a professional training course as well. It's, you know, longevity diet coaching, but people do it to understand their, you know, and it's no dogma in that training, just so you know. It's not, we're not vegan, we're not vegetarian, we're not, we look, yeah, we never have been. We look at all, Taoism looks at all of the food groups and looks at the energetics and explores things like your body type and your condition. And then we, you know, no dogma whatsoever. And we draw a lot on cultures of longevity, you know, from the original work of Weston Price back in the 1920s, not the Blue Zone writers. They had an agenda. I disagree with a lot of those, what they're saying. We go to the original work that was done in the 1920s. So, and then there's some other websites. Breakthrough is actually THRU hyphen technologies. And, you know, I have run the Academy Sacred Geometry for many years, and I've been able to sponsor many really good teachers in sacred geometry. Scott Olson, who wrote the book on the golden mean ratio,
Okay.
and a number of other teachers. They're sort of like one-off events. There's the Feng Shui Seminars.com, which is just an online training now. I don't teach that in class anymore, but it's a really good sort of 8-module training along, which integrates to a degree sacred geometry as well. But it goes through all of those metaphysical trainings that we use in Feng Shui, you know, the Minghua, using the Lopan compass, the 4 pillars astrology, which is, you know, year, month, day, hour of birth, a very amazing form of cosmology. So they're the main reference points for your listeners.
Amazing body of work. Seriously, just I'm in awe. So thank you for your dedication and
Thank you, Scott, for your work
leading the
too.
way, Roger,
Yeah.
leading the way.